Say goodbye to old, costly cable TV once and for all. This revolutionary invention gives you access to your favorite channels and movies completely free of charge. Greedy cable corporations are trying their best to outlaw the device. Surpassing standard cable companies in channel offerings and HD quality, deploys cutting-edge chip technology to capture satellite TV signals. It gives access to content across all major media platforms, eliminating the need for expensive contracts or monthly subscriptions, making traditional cable providers a thing of the past. Setting up this invention is a breeze, taking less than a minute. Simply plug it in and it works. The signal quality excels in both urban and rural settings. Meet Rewave, crafted by a former cable operator employee in Sydney, turned the TV industry.
Get a couple of things out of my way and check everything's going okay with the stream, and that looks great. Okay, so welcome. I'm Jeff Rich. This is the Burning Archive live, and I'm sort of using some slightly different software today and trying a few more technical tricks, so I hope you appreciate that, whether you join me live or whether you watch the show a little bit later on. I'm putting the show on today on Thursday the 9th of May 2024. It is Victory Day in Russia, and may I say to everyone listening, whether in Russia or with connections to Russia, and of course with connections and memories of the great fatherland, great patriotic war, Second World War, с днем Великой Победы. Здравствуйте, друзья. I hope you enjoy my stream, and I hope it gives you some insight into history in Russia, the persistence and memory of that history in Russia, and just why World War II, as we know it in the West, I guess, but also the Great Patriotic War is such a significant date in Russia, and why it's commemorated in the way it is, and whether in fact this Victory Day in Russia is perhaps a little bit sort of more special, because it is some significant events have happened over the last couple of weeks in Russia and in the conflict in Eastern Europe, and it is also coinciding with a sense of growing sense of cultural resurgence within Russia itself, and I'm going to be commenting on all those things in the live stream today. But first of all, let me also say that and this live stream is trying to help you see the world more clearly with some quality world history, and it is so important to see the meaning of Victory Day in Russia clearly, not just sort of dismiss it as propaganda or ultra-nationalism or Soviet era nostalgia or imperialist nostalgia. It is something more, and I think the emotion that is carried in that in the reality of Victory Day, I guess, for contemporary Russians, not just historical Russians, not just caricatures of Russian leaders that you often read in the press, but the emotional resonance of a Victory Day is very strong and very powerful, and I think it needs to be better understood because it is part of this shifting tide around the world of, I guess, the cultural resurgence, not just of the West and of globalization, but of the other parts of the world, of Russia, of China, of India, the Latin America, of Africa. and of Asia as a whole. It really is a time of enormous change, and that's what I try to help you understand here on the Burning Archive podcast. I've done a couple of live streams over the last couple of weeks, which have invited quite a few comments about the decline of the US empire. Are we living in an end of empire moment? And I'll come to some of the comments I've received over the last week or so on the stream in there. But by all means, if you're joining me, do say hello on the chat, and we can have a bit of a chat online here as well. Very much welcome anyone wanting to have a bit of a chat. Okay, so let me just run through... So yeah, if anyone wants to say hello in the chat, I'll sing out and say hello back to you. And I also just want to thank some of the people who've, offered me comments, and even especially a big thank you to the I don't know whether this is a code name or what, but to DS-UX9LD, who gave me a super thanks through the YouTube channel. That's the little heart thanks button down below the image there. You can click on that and help support the Burning Archive. You can also support the Burning Archive, of course, by going to my Buy Me a Coffee and joining my Substack, and you can see my free weekly newsletter, which I write a free essay on world history every week that comes out on a Saturday morning. That's at jeffrich.substack.com. You can go to that address now and sign up to that weekly email, and paid subscribers get an additional essay and some additional opportunities to chat with me on a Wednesday. So say hello, everyone, if you're online, and I will also now just get on with the chat, and I will come back to some of the comments and thanks, which have been fantastic and really interesting. Actually, why don't I just read out a couple of those comments now. I got a great comment from ALS5482 with a suggestion that I have Clinton Fernandez on the show, and ALS5482, I will see what I can do about that. Clinton Fernandez is, if those of you who don't know, is a former, I think, intelligence analyst who has written a book here in Australia called Sub-Empire, I think, or Sub-Imperial Power, which is really about the way in which Australia operates as a sub-imperial power, initially to Britain, and then since, 1950 or so, to the United States of America. And that would be a great idea. I will see what I can do. And if you've got suggestions for topics or ideas or comments on the show, whether you're watching live or watching in the replay, send me a comment, and I try to reply to all my comments, and also and see what I can do about creating some videos on areas that interest you to help you see the world more clearly with some quality world history. Okay, let me get back to the rundown of the show. So today, one other thing. I also, today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about the meaning of Victory Day, the En Padiebi in Russia, and I'm going to have a bit of a discussion about what I think has been happening in the state of play in the conflict between Russia and NATO, or the collective West in Ukraine, and what's been happening geopolitically over the last week or two, it's actually been a very, a difficult time. Not broadly known, but I guess we've had something equivalent to a Cuban Missile Crisis over the last couple of weeks, which perhaps people are prudently not talking up too much, but there has been talk on both sides of pushing military forces beyond tolerable boundaries for either side, and the potential risk of a catastrophic use of nuclear weapons. And of course, the use of nuclear weapons is not just catastrophic for the, people who are directly affected by the strike, but there are potentially horrible consequences in terms of like a nuclear winter for the entire world. So it's simply something that we should not be going anywhere near, but regrettably some people in the world are we're having to deal with that real risk. So one can only hope that perhaps sensible heads will prevail, and we'll get back onto a path of dialogue and diplomacy and ultimately peace with Russia. I see Pepperoni saying it was estimated as few as 14 nuclear detonations could cause nuclear winter. Absolutely. It's actually quite scary. I can't remember who it was, but there was a guest I heard on Hrvoje Morić's show, Geopolitics and Empire, who specialises in this and tries to, deepen information about the risk of, nuclear, of any kind of nuclear conflict. That the idea that you can use technical nuclear weapons and it will all be sort of manageable. Maybe Europe will get destroyed, but the United States will be okay, is a bit of an illusion, and this author really goes into that. So it is absolutely something that should be avoided. So I want to talk a little bit about that, the geopolitical conflicts. Then this idea of a cultural resurgence or cultural renaissance. Cultural renaissance might be a bit of a overused word, but certainly there is a sense of cultural resurgence going on in Russia today. And I will also talk about what I probably would like to do in the live streams, and which, this is kind of what I do with my Substack and my other work. I try to connect people to major figures from our cultural heritage. And today I want to talk about a famous Russian writer who I put a photo of on my on the YouTube community page, and asked if people could guess who that person is. So I will reveal the identity of the famous, brilliant writer from Russia, who perhaps represents a bit of a spirit of how culture outlasts politics, and how that can be a very inspiring thing, even though her story is extremely tragic. And I guess that kind of tragedy takes us to the topic of today, which is the Victory Day and what it means, because that figure, the figure I'll talk about towards the end of the show, is died, in fact, soon after the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, in part provoked, of course, by some other things as well. Alrighty, let me head over to this little screen of myself. I'll take the little branding off for now, and we'll talk about the meaning of Victory Day in Russia, 9 May 2024. Now, Victory Day in Russia commemorates the day on which the Soviet Union defeated Nazi Germany, liberated Europe, Germany, the world from the Nazi occupation and or threat, and of course liberated Berlin. It was the Soviet Union who did that, not the West. Now, I believe there's a Europe Day, which is, I think, either the day after or the day before, something like that, which is the Western version of Victory Day. And now in Ukraine, Europe Day, but not Victory Day, is celebrated, even though the people of Ukraine, at least some of them, fought against in those armies that liberated Berlin on the 9th of May, even though there were a few of them, of course, who fought with the German forces during Operation Barbarossa. Now, Victory Day is incredibly important because it commemorates World War II, and I don't know, maybe the people who watch the Building Archive channel will be well aware of this, but in the general public, I guess, particularly in the Western world, are brought up on a diet of, Hollywood movies, American, British versions of World War II, perhaps don't quite realise the extent to which World War II, the extent of the losses of the peoples of the Soviet Union during World War II. It was truly, truly astonishing. Like, it's estimated that something even more than 27 million people were died during World War II. They weren't all soldiers, but a large number of them are. And, the historians talk about the sort of margin of error in the calculations for losses of World War II in the realm of a million or more, because it is quite difficult to calculate. You can understand, Leningrad was entirely besieged for something like 3 years. Approximately 1 million people died of starvation and bombing and the cold and desperation in Leningrad during the siege. And it's significant that at times people talk about the economic sanctions that the West are putting on Russia these days, with a reference to the siege of Leningrad. So extraordinary losses. Every family in Russia would have experienced some kind of loss during that war. And so it is extraordinarily powerful. And like most commemorations of war, you think about Australia, Anzac Day, you think about V-Day or whatever it is, or the other sorts of commemorations of sadness, death, loss, sacrifice, a whole lot of very complicated emotions and complicated stories are involved in those commemorations. And like those days in Russia, the Victory Day has gone through some different sort of forms over the years. Initially, it was a relatively low-key affair, I guess, as one could perhaps imagine. One can't quite I mean, you just think about it, 27 million, that's the entire population of Australia. We don't necessarily want to get out on the streets all that much. But from the 1960s, it kind of picked up and continued through the Soviet Union and became quite a significant military parade, one of the major military parades. So demonstration of the resurgent power of the Soviet Union during the 60s and 70s. Continued to like the end of the Soviet Union in 1991, but then for a few years kind of went into a pause, but was revived fairly soon afterwards by Boris Yeltsin in 1995. So really only like about 3 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. When you think about it, there was a lot of mixed up feelings and a lot of issues to kind of come to terms with in terms of the communist legacy, the way in which Victory Day was treated with, communist propaganda, a new embrace of the West, a sort of a sense of a kind of a sense of cultural defeat almost in parts in the Soviet Union. And then, of course, the 1990s was a period of political disorder, social disorder, economic collapse. It was a tragic set of years. But it was in the 1990s that Victory Day sort of kind of got back on its feet. But then under Vladimir Putin's leadership in the 2000s, it started to be revived. And there are a lot of people who talk about Victory Day very much in terms of like propaganda and Putin and, extreme patriotism and all this kind of thing. And will often, there's a very big, you could almost say it's an industry, but certainly there's a big number of people who are in the United States and Britain who work within a certain tradition of talking about invented tradition and the use of history for governmental propaganda sort of purposes. And no doubt there is some element of the government in Russia using those ceremonies, those histories, those icons in that sort of way. But it also very much, I think, comes to some degree up from below, from genuine cultural expression of people. And there is I think the perhaps clearest example of that is what's called the March of the Immortal Regiment. And really in 2012 it was, when people were still a little bit uncertain about how exactly to celebrate Victory Day, as indeed, over time people have had this same question in Australia and other countries with the gradual, I guess, dying out of so many of the veterans of World War II. I mean, it is now nearly 80 years ago. But from 2012, there was a group of journalists in the city of Tomsk in sort of Siberia, I think it is, sort of central Russia. They organised a street march where the descendants of veterans marched through the city with holding up photographs of their deceased relatives who had fought in World War II. And they called it the Immortal Regiment. It initially attracted a group of about 6,000 people, but then it really caught fire. It caught people's imagination. And I think you've even seen expressions of the same sort of thing in some of the sort of, war memorial type marches in the West. But it has such deep resonance, of course, in Russia. You've even seen Vladimir Putin march in some of these marches with, photographs of his dead relatives from the war. So it became a much more, a very, it became an important expression of people's own sense of the tragedy of war, the tragedy of death, the sense of loss, but also a sense of recovery, of pride, I guess, in their culture, and a gradual sense of resurgence of that culture. And on Russia Today, in fact, there's quite a good little article about this Victory Day thing. And it says there that the idea of marching with the photographs of their ancestors appealed to people all over Russia, and the very next year, immortal regiment events were held in almost all of the major cities of Russia. The march instantly became a Victory Day tradition, and the event gained official status. And there's an online offshoot of the Immortal Regiment where anyone can publish information about their ancestors who fought in World War II, with now nearly 1 million records online. Thus, this writer says, who's an historian, May 9th acquired a new meaning. It became not only a veterans' holiday or a celebration of military triumph, but also a memorial march which allowed people to honour their personal family history. And if you caught the the song I played at the start of the live stream, Shamans, Vastanam, We Rise, incredibly powerful song. You should check it out if you haven't already done so. If you didn't see it or haven't seen it previously, you should check it out on YouTube. And this song, when I first heard it, I assumed he was actually singing like an old war memorial song. It's incredibly powerful, but in fact he wrote this himself as, like, he's a songwriter / poet, really. Some of his lines, as I think one of the commentators on the channel has said, have a remarkable simplicity and power and compression. He wrote this song himself only in 2022, and both with the quality of his singing and the quality of the lyrics and the emotion of that song, it sort of caught something in the mood. It's become something of a iconic song of the commemoration of Victory Day in Russia. So, extraordinarily meaningful event, and I think it's important. I think it's also I think a sign of how important this is, and how we need to listen and respect and try to understand it, but also see this as a bit of a example of different understandings of what happened in 1945 and how the world was arranged in 1945. This is a topic I've been exploring in my Substack, where I've been writing a sort of a history of the multipolar world. We've got a certain assumed set of stories in our sort of Western heads, which are not really the same in other parts of the world. And we need to understand how the other parts of the world have seen how the world has shaped and changed since 1945, since 1991, since 2008, since 2022, and try to see how there's some new forces of the world. And one of those forces is this growing sense of, I guess, cultural resurgence, the sense of pride, I guess, in Russian civilization, Russian culture, but similarly in India and China and other parts of the world, the West simply cannot continue carrying on with the idea that, it's the garden and the rest of the world is the jungle. We can't really keep preaching like Konstantin Kishin that the West is best, and everyone else needs to really pull themselves in line. And look, there is a wonderful post on the Russians with Attitude Twitter stream. I listen to Russians with Attitude quite a bit, and I'll just bring it up here. You can see that on screen, and I'll just read it to you, or at least parts of it to you as well. So they say, so Russians with Attitude, a bunch of guys who live in Russia, they do an English language broadcast about Russia, and it's great listening. I started listening to it before the special military operation. It's had a particular flavour. Since the special military operation, they've covered a lot of the events. But it's fascinating because you get an insight really into how contemporary Russians see history and their culture, and they, as I'll talk a little bit later, have a different sense to the standard stories that we tell ourselves. So much of the history of Russia in the English-speaking world is dominated by, a particular set of things out of, Britain and America, which tend to talk Russia down, and it's interesting to hear their perspective. So I probably won't read all of this, but I'll just read some key points. So they say today is Victory Day. People in Russia in the West love making this date about stuff that is far removed from the important thing. People love discussing who or what won the war. The war was not won by Stalin's genius or the superiority of the Soviet system. Stalin was a thug who put a bunch of incompetent yes-men in charge and only started doing sensible things on the verge of apocalypse. The Soviet system sucked. The war was not won by Lend-Lease, that's the American aid program, I guess, which I believe at most contributed about 10% of the funding of the Soviet war effort. The Russian or the Soviet Union was contributing in like much greater proportions of artillery and human resources and airplanes and other sorts of things in the conduct of the war. Soviet soldiers were happy to eat Spam cans in the trenches and getting their supplies via American trucks. Sure, the British and Canadian lads running the convoys to Murmansk were heroes that helped with the siege of Leningrad. All that saved lives, made things easier, but in the end it's not parties or flags or machines or guns or food that wins wars. It's people. You can have the best logistics and the biggest guns, and in the end it's still a contest of wills, and if your will falters you will lose. And then they tell the stories about their own families who and their experiences in the war, and I'll leave that to you to read. I'll include the link to the tweet in the description below, but they finish off this long tweet by saying, my great-grandfathers and their brothers, 9 men, 7 of them were killed in battle, whole bloodlines wiped out, settlements erased from the map forever. It became personal for everyone. The people of Russia found their will, the grim determination of the deepest, most chthonic, that means like earthly forces of the collective Russian soul is what made the difference. tens of millions perished in the most terrible war with the highest stakes in all of human history. The survivors fired their guns into the sky in Berlin. They won at a horrifying cost, but they had bested the best. Their victory is a lesson to us descendants. We've started to remember that lesson. The descendants of the witnesses of that victory have forgotten that lesson. That means, the West. But should they repeat the greatest mistake, it will all come back again at a horrifying cost, but again ending in victory. So yeah, there is a special flavour, I think, too. That's a remarkable thing, and I really do recommend people have a look at that. Let me just take a little breath of air here, or sip of green tea, Zelonye chai, I should say. So extraordinary thing. I'll come back to Russians with attitude and that sense of cultural resurgence in Russia a little bit later in the stream. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about today was the geopolitical events involving Russia over the last week or so, and how they're playing into today's Victory Day celebration and this cultural resurgence, this sense, because I think it is becoming increasingly clear that Russia is sensing an imminent victory over Ukraine and NATO, a greater sense of confidence, as they keep saying soberly that the objectives of the special military operation will be achieved. As I said a little bit earlier, it has been a remarkable week over the last week or so. At some point, the British Foreign Minister said it was he was comfortable, or he approved of using British weapons to strike Russian, domestic Russian targets. Not targets in Ukraine, not targets in contested territory, but targets within Russia. Even today, on a Victory Day, we've seen that Ukraine sent drone targets, potentially with Western collaboration, to attack cities within Russia. And but there's increasing advances in the Donbass, where Russia is advancing. The Ukrainian forces seem to be the scale of losses are increasing, the lack of defensive positions are getting exposed, and there is a growing sense of panic, if not collapse, both within the Ukraine government and within the NATO forces themselves. Emmanuel Macron said he would be prepared to put French forces in to fight Ukraine, and this provoked quite a intense response from Russia. Dmitry Medvedev said if that were the case, Russia would not hesitate in striking decision-making centres, including within the territory of NATO countries, Britain, France, Washington, or the United States of America, and Romania and Poland and all those US bases in Eastern Europe. And these comments, as well as some actions, I guess, so the Russia conducted not tests, but did a a test run, I guess, of their tactical nuclear weapons, as if to say to the Western powers, do not even try. So, really serious stuff. Now, I most of what I've learnt about all of this, I've taken from I guess Russian media, from the Duran and other independent media. I understand that there's been very little reporting of this in the mainstream Western media, and maybe that's prudent because it's pretty scary events, and it's perhaps time for fewer headlines and more diplomacy. But nonetheless, it's very, very significant events that have happened over the last week. And it does seem to have quietened down a bit. But there is a really great discussion between Glenn Deason, the Norwegian geopolitical analyst and professor of international relations, author of the Ukraine War and the Eurasian World Order, I think it is, which is an excellent book. And he's had a discussion with Douglas McGregor, and in that discussion, Douglas McGregor says, Ukraine, this war is lost. Ukraine and NATO, because NATO is a participant in this war in various ways, they have lost the war, and it's now, I guess, the approach of the end. There's a sense in which we are almost seeing a bit of a fighting retreat from the Western leaders. I wonder how much some of these events have been choreographed quite a long time ago with an expectation that, interference in the Russian election, various terror attacks and all that sort of thing would have a destabilizing effect on the Russian regime, and they simply haven't. And the capacity, the aid package to Ukraine simply hasn't worked, and things seem to be unraveling faster than people anticipated. So Russia is winning the war, and the West is increasingly realizing that. But that is forcing some difficult psychological issues, I think, on the West. It's not easy to admit you got it wrong. It's not easy to admit you've been defeated. It is not easy to admit when you've spent, as the United States has, 30, arguably 80 years seeing itself as, the leader of the free world and all that sort of thing. The hyperpower, the greatest power that ever existed on Earth. To realise you have just got to get along with the other people on this Earth and not just through fighting wars. So it is very perilous times, I think, at the moment, and there is a real sense that I guess Russia is approaching victory in this war, this military war. It appears to have already won if you like, the economic war, although that continues, I guess. And it is better positioned than one might have initially thought in the diplomatic war as well. But I have been reflecting over the last, few months, really, about how our current situation is not dissimilar to aspects of 1914. In fact, I got a great comment during the week from let me just find this comment. I got a great comment saying that this was in response, I think, to my video or stream on whether we're going through a sewers crisis. I got a great comment from Lady Morwende Brethel Fiange 4031. Let's just say Lady Morwen for short, Morwend for short. I fear we are not in 1956, but in early 1914. And absolutely. And in fact, a couple of months ago, I did a video about whether we're sleepwalking to war, like people did in Europe in 1914. And I based that on a book by Christopher Clark called The Sleepwalkers, How Europe Went to War in 1914. Which is a brilliant history of I think, well, it's the best one I've read of really how Europe went to war in 1914, how the world went to war in 1914. And one of the points he makes is that, he makes a few really crucial points. One, he talks about how trust disappeared from the international system, and that just made all the vexed decisions about war and peace and diplomacy so much harder to communicate. He also said executives were divided, and like I spent 30 years in government, executives are always divided. There's always differences of opinions, conflicts, factions, differences, rivalries, different ways of reading the contradictory evidence of events within executives. But that was a feature of 1914, and isn't that the case these days as well? Look at what's going on in the United States, with some people say let's fight with China, some people say no, let's fight Russia, some people say let's fight both, some people say let's fight them both and Iran, and so on and so forth. But the key thing he mentioned was this idea of opt-in decisions, and he described how the Austria-Hungarian Empire, which we don't hear a lot about these days, it's the empire that sort of disappeared in World War One, at the end of World War One. I guess a remnant of that empire is part of the current state of Ukraine, the the western part around what used to be Lemberg and Lvov and Lviv. It was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. It's part of the Ukrainian identity. Is the mix of Poland and Austria-Hungary and the Russian sort of culture, Slavic culture as well. But that empire, as well as the Russian empire, that one disappeared. The German imperial empire, that one disappeared. And Austria-Hungary had reason to believe it was one of the greatest powers on earth. It was the inheritor of the Habsburg Empire. It was the inheritor, really, of the Spanish Empire of the 16th century, the Habsburgs. And it had a great sense of being, the most civilized country on earth in 1913 and 1914. And yet there had long been discussion of Austria-Hungary being in decline. Sort of going down the tube. And so war and proving itself in war and reasserting its pride and confidence in itself in war became a key factor in the minds of decision makers in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And it led them to make decisions that Christopher Clark calls opt-in decisions, or he uses this term which comes from decision-making analysis. And it's when people aren't making what appears to be a rational decision, just weighing up the costs, the pros and the cons, the costs and the benefits, but they're taking a big risk with their decision, because the decision in itself is a statement of who they really are. It's a statement of, it's what we almost might call an existential question these days. It becomes a much bigger thing. And so it appears not to be rational, but it is part of the emotional thinking human brain. And that is something that seemed to be happening in 1914. And I regret to think that I wonder if that is part of what is going on in Western capitals today. Britain is a state of diminishing importance in the world, led by a government that has virtually it's certain to be defeated in an election within 6 months or so. It has a foreign minister who, had to be made a lord to become foreign minister after being one of the worst prime ministers in recent British history. The man who brought the disaster of the Brexit referendum onto Britain, David Cameron. And it's sort of like his final effort in his final time in the saddle. Could he make a catastrophically terrible decision with an eye on his place in history? Emmanuel Macron has been making these what seem to be erratic decisions, but perhaps are also big gambles about putting Europe centre stage in diplomacy, putting France centre stage again in diplomacy. Is he making an opting decision? And whoever is making decisions within the American administration, including Joe Biden, are they making decisions saying, America will remain number one on my watch, and we will do potentially high-risk things in order to prove it? So it's very troubling, that sort of thing. On the same side, I don't know if I get the same mood about that from Russia. I see much more prudent decision-making, but there has certainly been an escalation of rhetoric of saying, come to your senses, but behind all of it is the sense of saying, the era in which America told everyone in the world what to do is over, and you need to start to learn to conduct relations with us without the arrogance and exclusivity. And I think unless that arrogance and exclusivity is taken out of Western diplomacy, I really do fear for where we might end up. But we will keep watching that. But I think in that there is a sense in which Russia has growing self-confidence as well. And that's just not a self-confidence about the regime. No, I can't see. Pepperoni says I can't see a Minsk Free being signed. Absolutely. Of course, the Minsk agreement there were two Minsk peace agreements, which were, I think the first one, well, I can't remember the exact dates, but one was basically signed after the sort of Donbass republics sort of defeated Ukraine on the battlefield. There was a risk of a catastrophic loss for Ukraine, and Germany and France and America kind of stepped in and negotiated a peace deal with Russia, which was actually ultimately endorsed by the UN Security Council, but was repeatedly breached by the Ukrainians and the Americans and the Brits and the French and the Germans. In fact, leaders from France, Germany, and Ukraine all said that they all saw the Minsk agreement as a bit of a ruse. And as Pepperoni says, that kind of thing simply will not be done. There is a much lower trust environment. There will need to be a far more conclusive settlement to this that ultimately leads to a new post-World War II security arrangement in Europe. So again, I guess that's one of the other resonances of this. The failure to really negotiate a peaceful resolution of the Cold War, and to dissolve NATO the way the Soviet Union dissolved the Warsaw Pact, and to come to some new collective security arrangement. That was a real drastic error, and ultimately that will need to be sorted out. So absolutely, Pepperoni, I can't see a Minsk III being signed either. But yeah, so there is this sense that Russia has growing self-confidence. It's winning the military war, it's survived the economic war, and is prospering and increasingly allied with, China and other BRICS nations to ride the new waves of globalization. It is doing well in the diplomatic conflict, and it has survived that remarkable era, that period of attempt to cancel Russia. And as we saw at the start of the show with SHAMAN singing Vestanum, there is a real sense of cultural resurgence in Russia at the moment. And in fact, the Russians with Attitude guys, Kirill and Nikolai, shout out to them if they're listening. I really love your show. Listen all the time. And they had a sort of a tweet during the week, which I just have here, and I'll just sort of read it to you. So they say, there's a great resurgence of traditional culture in Russia, not an artificial state-sponsored initiative, but a genuine popular cultural phenomenon. Every other music clip, TV series, video features deep Russian lore. We are thriving over here, folks. Sorry, you're not invited to experience it. So, very interesting point, I think. And I think we see this in a range of ways. We see it in that song, Vestanum. We Rise, which, is partly talking about I guess ascending to heaven and meeting again the dead heroes and the dead family heroes of the victims of, Germany's war against the Soviet Union in 1941 and 42, 43, 44, 45. But it's also expressed in other ways. It's expressed in Shaman's song, Ya Ruski, Despite the Whole World. A wonderful song, but also the response to that song. It's not just it's not just like some put on sort of thing. You see the vibrancy and the energy. There's this remarkable film, I think it's the Red Sails Festival in St. Petersburg, where basically a whole cohort of graduating students dancing and celebrating this remarkable song, singing Ya Ruski. It's a beautiful expression of, I guess, youth, as well as being an expression of pride. It shouldn't be dismissed as just, patriotism or ultra-nationalism or something like that. It's actually talking about connecting with their culture and finding strength in their culture. It's expressed also, there's a phrase that comes from a film from 2000, Brother 2, which is, "Our strength is in truth." And this phrase was in fact used by the Russian defense minister over the last week or two in talking about, the situation in the war. He said, "Our strength is in truth." In the film, this phrase is used in an exchange between an American and a Russian. And remember, in the year 2000 is the year, Vladimir Putin becomes president. It's really the end of the Yeltsin era, the end of the, lawless, oligarchical, disastrous years of the 1990s, and the beginning of the turning away from ultra American pro-liberal political culture in America, in Russia, and also just the social tragedy of what happened in Russia in the 1990s. And the American says to the Russian, "Our strength is in money," and the Russian says, "Our strength is in truth." And of course, it's not just because that statement is made in a film that it is resonant. There's a similar statement in the song Vastanam by SHAMAN at the start. Truth is our strength. Truth is on our side. Right is on our side. It's a much longer, deeper sentiment. It's partly a statement of faith and all that sort of thing. So it's by no means exclusively Russian, but it's interesting that it's enjoying something of a resurgence in Russia at the moment. And I think is perhaps a bit of a sign that there is a bit of a cultural renaissance in Russia, which in many ways I think we're also seeing, whether you use the term renaissance or resurgence or self-confident or energy or vitality, you see this in many parts of the world. You see it in India, you see it in China, you see it in Africa as well. A growing sense that, our approach to the world is valid. We don't need to be lectured to by the West. We're not trying to imitate the West. We will find our own path and find our own truth, and that is our strength. It's not just the money that you can potentially offer us that really matters to us. We don't really want the money. We want to pursue truth. And this is partly what I mean by, I guess, I have this phrase that I've been talking about on my Substack, the new tides of globalization. Globalization through most of the 90s, 2000s, up to the 2020s really was equated with, Americanization, with westernization. Thomas Friedman, the American journalist, had this infamous or famous book called "The World is Flat." The world will follow our rules-based international order. The world will follow one model. History has ended. There was a real sense that the world, that culture had reached its pinnacle and everything would now follow the same approach. But I think that has changed. It has changed economically, it's changed militarily, it's changed politically, it's changed socially, it's changed culturally as well. We've seen the growth of what some people call Hindu nationalism, but which is also an expression of Indian Bharat cultural self-assertion. And we've seen the same thing with China, we've seen the same thing with other countries in the world, and very much I think we see this also with Russia today. And I'll be continuing to write about that on the Substack, as well as my brief history of the multipolar world. So I'll just take a little break from things and say that on the Substack I've been writing on the for paid subscribers, I've been writing this series of essays on the brief history of the multipolar world, where I've basically been putting the argument that the world has always been multipolar. Even when everyone thought the world was unipolar, really there was a lot more distributed power around the world than perhaps people kind of noticed, or perhaps chose to focus on in the 1990s with Charles Krauthammer's phrase of the birth of the unipolar moment. And in that series, I'm just about to do the discussion of the period between 1991 and, I'm going to say, to 2008. So the end of the Cold War, and if you like, to pin a date on it, the famous speech that Vladimir Putin gave to the Munich Security Conference, I think in 2007. But then with the global financial crisis, it had a new resonance, which was when he said that a multipolar world is emerging and the West needs to adapt to that sort of multipolar world. So do go to, let me just bring it up, do go to jeffrich.substack.com, and then you can join my free weekly newsletter, and you'll get a little bit of this, absolutely. But if you also pay, I think it's like $10 a month, maybe, for the full subscription, you will get my essays and all my archive, my burning archive, all previous articles on the history of the multipolar world. And I think that would really, if you're interested in geopolitics, if you're interested in Russian history, if you're interested in world history, it will give you, I think, a new, fresh perspective on understanding the world a little bit more clearly. Alrighty, so let me go now to the fourth segment of the show. And I think on my community page, if you just give me a sec, I'm just going to have a little sip of water. I've been talking non-stop now for an hour and 15 minutes, so that's not surprising. I should need a quick glass of water. If anyone's got any comments, do throw them in there. And I'll also actually, after talking about this fourth point, I will sort of go through some of the highlight comments I've got over the last week or so. One of which I've got to say is Pepperoni's comment about the nuclear detonations. It really, people should really seek out some of the information about the potential impact of even a few nuclear strikes on on the climate, the environment, the food supply, the world, because it really is very scary stuff, and it should force people to be a little bit more prudent in their diplomacy. All right, so on my community page on the YouTube channel, I think yesterday I put up a picture of a mystery writer and asked people, who was this writer, this figure from the burning archive, the cultural heritage of the world, who is, I think, well known in Russia, but I don't know how well known she is more broadly in English-speaking countries, in the West more generally. And she is, in fact, let me just bring her up here, Marina Tsvetaeva. A brilliant, wonderful poet and essayist, and also a playwright, Marina Tsvetaeva. And that picture there is a picture of her in 1914, before the catastrophe of World War I and before the catastrophe of the Russian Revolution and the Civil War, and then for her emigration / exile from Russia, and then the nature of the regime in Russia as well. Her story is really quite remarkable. And let me briefly tell you that story as well. I will just quickly, in doing that, take off the picture of Marina Tsvetaeva. Wonderful poet. And look, that's a book of her essays that I have, Art in the Light of Conscience. And I'm going to be reading one of these essays for, my series of gentle, slow readings of significant essays in history shortly on the program. I think I might even bring it out on Sunday. So what I'm trying to do is bring that kind of thing out on Sunday. And here is a collection of her essential poetry. She was a very major poet. She corresponded with Boris Pasternak and with Rilke, of the Duino elegies and that sort of thing. And she was the daughter of a professor who was the founder of the Museum of Fine Arts in Moscow, I think, or St. Petersburg. Moscow, the Museum of Fine Arts. And she was encouraged to be like a music virtuoso by her mother, but her mother died in her teenage years, after which, in fact, a concert pianist, after which Tsvetaeva really focused on poetry. And she clearly had an extraordinary gift of language. She knew multiple languages, and her essays and her poetry move in and out of different registers and all that sort of thing. Ordinary speech, dramatic dialogue, high culture, all the rest of it. In my own slight way, at times, I have actually been influenced by how she wrote her essays. In some of the essays I write as well. She married a chap called Sergei Efron in 1912, had 2 daughters, but then and a son, but 1917, the revolution occurred. Ephron joined the White Army, and Tsvetaeva was separated from him. She had affairs with other poets, but most significantly, after the revolution, there was in the Civil War, there was a severe famine in Russia, in Moscow in particular, and this forced Tsvetaeva to place her daughters in a state orphanage where the younger one died of hunger in 1919. In 1922, she, along with quite a few other cultural figures in Russia, she emigrated. She emigrated to Berlin, the Berlin of Babylon, Berlin, in the golden 20s, then to Prague, and ultimately to Paris, where she lived in poverty, and with her husband, Sergei Ephron. Now, after the Civil War, she tried to be part of the large expatriate emigre community. But in fact, Sergei Ephron was working for the Soviet secret police, and Tsvetaeva also, her character perhaps also led her to be isolated from many people. She had years of privation, exile, and yet she wrote great poetry through that, but returned to the Soviet Union with her husband, who was working for the NKVD, the secret police in Russia. But in the 1930s, in the purges, Ephron was executed, and Tsvetaeva's daughter was sent to a labour camp. Then in 1941, I think it was June 1941, the German army launched Operation Barbarossa, launched the war against the Soviet Union, began what became the Great Patriotic War that is commemorated in Victory Day. And Tsvetaeva, along with many of the citizens of that, I guess, Western Russia, was evacuated deeper into the Russian territory to a place called Yelabuga, and there on August 31, 1941, she hanged herself in despair, and sadly she was buried at a funeral which no one attended. It was deep, dark days. So one might say Tsvetaeva in a way, she's a wonderful image of Russia's, or a wonderful example of the cultural brilliance of Russia's Silver Age, and the tragedies of those Silver Age cultural figures like Akhmatova, who suffered through the dark days of the revolution and the Civil War and the 1920s, and then obviously the Stalin era, the years of the terror in the 1930s and so on. So very, very sad story, but a very brilliant poet and a very brilliant essayist. And as I said, I think I will be and as I said, I think I will be writing. Sorry, just got distracted there for a second, manipulating all my different screens here on the streaming operation. I will be reading. I think I'll probably read Svetaeva's essay, The Poet in Time, I think. I think that's the one I will do. Poet in Time, or Poets with History and Poets Without History. Either of those, and that will probably be bringing that out on Sunday. So, absolute wonderful example, I think, of the survival of culture through difficulties of politics. And I think tragic though that story is, I think it's also a deeply moving story in our own times when things could very easily get very, very, very bad indeed. Now, I just want to give a few shout-outs to a few of the comments. I see History Lit's online. Hi, History Lit. Thanks for your comments through the week on the stream. I hope all is well with you. It's always good to have some good, respectful disagreement on matters of history, because there is so many different ways you can tell the stories of history. So I'm really great. It's really great that you're tuning in, and thanks for all that you do as well in encouraging people to have a broad-minded perspective on history. But I also got a comment during the week from Sophia Shakti 5638, which I think this is interesting, because as I was just talking about Svetaeva and the Silver Age poets, and I think this was in the context of referring to T.S. Eliot's poem The Hollow Men. This is how the world ends, not with a bang but with a whimper, talking about the end of empire. And it Sophia Shakti 5638, may I call you Sophia, says, it seems that ideas have a prodromal period. Eliot in the West, Bloch in Russia, Alexander Bloch, a great Russian poet, who in fact Svetaeva writes about in one of those essays. One feels demise, another a great rise. Thank you very much. A thought-provoking vanitas vanitatum omnia vanitas. Lay people have no meaning without a leader. Wonderful comment, Sophia. Thank you very much. And I think I might even read some of Bloch's poetry on the channel before too long, as well as reading Svetaeva. Now, also, we have a comment from, I mentioned the comment from ALS 5482 about getting the guest Aussie Clinton Fernandez onto the show. I'll do my best. I'll certainly look to do a program on his book, Sub-Imperial Power, which is really excellent. And then I've got a comment from WLim1260, who says, and this is in relationship to recommended books on Chinese history. Excuse me a moment. For the casual reader to get a sense of the turn of the century China, I highly recommend Lin Yutang, Chinese writer from China at the turn of the century, writing about China at the turn of the century. And it's really great to hear, actually, because, too much, Anglophone history is, Brits and Americans talking about other countries rather than hearing the stories from those countries. And absolutely, they've got that right to give that perspective as well. And I deeply respect it. I've known some of those scholars over the years. But it's also so good to actually hear the history, hear the culture in its own voice as well. So, WLim1260 goes on and says, you're getting an eyewitness account, as it were. He learnt English and writes both fluently and beautifully in English. His novels, Moment in Peking and A Leaf in the Storm, cover the fall of the Qing up to the Sino-Japanese War. If you want to know what has seared itself into Chinese cultural consciousness from a Chinese perspective. Read those. So that's Lin Yu Tang, Moment in Peking, and A Leaf in the Storm. Great recommendations. Thanks so much, W. Lim, and I will see what I can do about reading them. I'll add them to my long reading list. Then we have Robin A. Hill Paints, who says, I'm so happy to have found this channel. As an American growing more interested in what I'd call post-liberal thinking, hearing a thoughtful foreign perspective on my country is helpful. Would love to see you cover Alexander Dugin and his fourth turning theory. Now, that's a great comment from Robin. I think there's two things put together with Alexander Dugin. He's got a fourth political theory, and there's also, I think, some American social commentators who have a theory of a fourth turning, which is kind of a cyclical theory of history, that every 80 years or so there's a fourth turning, that things sort of kind of go wrong. But Alexander Dugin is absolutely a very interesting figure, and I will think about doing that. I could get myself in trouble with YouTube for doing it, but I've seen him appear on a couple of interviews recently, including Russians with Attitude did a wonderful interview with Alexander Dugin that you might want to check out as well. I think that would be perhaps the best way to understand Alexander Dugin. Look for Russians with Attitude, Alexander Dugin, and you'll find that as well. And I might even do something on the sort of social cycles, the sort of cycles theory of history. You get this with people like Peter Turchin and others. I tend to be a little bit skeptical of the cycles stuff because I think it's all a little bit more chaotic than that. But that is a really great comment, and I've got to say I'm quite interested in the whole post-liberal thinking as well, without committing to any particular position. But it is interesting how I think there's a bit of a breaking apart of the cultural consensus in the West as well. Interesting times, aren't they? Then we have a comment from Pang Layman 5576. It's hard sometimes to work out how to read these tags. It might recover. This is in reference to the declining US empire. It might recover like Russia recovered after divesting itself of its empire, the Soviet republics and the Warsaw Pact. But as far as leading the world into the next century in its current form, that is DOA, dead on arrival. The Western elites are not prepared intellectually for a world of sovereign nation states, so they might have no idea about how to act. Proceed forward, much like Gorbachev, not understanding free markets, could not understand how Margaret Thatcher kept London supplied with foodstuffs, and asked how she went about it. Similarly, there's a story about Boris Yeltsin being mesmerized almost by the availability of goods in American supermarkets. And I guess that was part of the era of the high point of American cultural influence, I guess, in the late 80s and 90s, and the way in which, if you like, the symmetry between that and Tucker Carlson going to Moscow and saying, you know, God, the Moscow subway is so much better than the New York subway, and there's all this stuff I can get so much more cheaply at the Russian supermarkets than I can in the American supermarkets. It's kind of interesting example of what I was saying about the changing tides in world history. Some of those deep sort of currents of culture and you know, the fabric of daily social life, I think, are as important to understand as, you know, the big big events of military geopolitics and all that kind of stuff as well. Okay, I've got 3 more comments here, so I will do those, and then I might wrap up the show. If anyone's online who wants to throw in a question as well, please do that. I've got a comment from Truth Above All 7988. I love your oration. I read Ray Dalio's latest Pringles book a few years ago, so the idea of our empire's decline has been on my mind, but what truly educated me was how to hide an empire. America, the Farewell Tour, and Washington Bullets. Now, How to Hide an Empire, I think, is a book by Daniel Imawar, and America, the Farewell Tour, I think, is Chris Hedges. I believe Chris Hedges has recently been censored in some way, deplatformed in some way, taken off a show or something like that. And I'm not sure what Washington Bullets is. But Truth Above All 7988 continues by saying, we are burning down our house from inside the house. The American propaganda machine has destroyed solidarity amongst the people, and so the demands to end foreign occupation won't come in time. We need an educated people who mobilise. I hope that happens in a united way to save the world from our bang. Yes, I'm out here in one of the outer provinces of the American Empire in the South Pacific in southern Australia, and I must say I'm terribly worried about where America could take us all. I've written a few essays about it on Substack and also on publication Pearls and Irritations, which you can find with my various if you go to my Substack, I think on the website there I've got links to all those articles, and it is a big worry as well. But I think I also would say to Truth Above All 7988 that I might try to do a review of Daniel Imawa's book How to Hide an Empire on the Burning Archive channel soon. That would be a really good one, I think, because it remains a topic of debate. Is America really an empire, or what's the right term for it, or that sort of thing. So I think that's a great suggestion. And then Carved Out of Stone, and thanks Carved Out of Stone for all your support and encouragement and thanks and technical tips and all the rest of it over time. I really, really appreciate it. So thanks Carved Out of Stone. Carved Out of Stone said you should do, I think this is in response to the reading I gave of Kamo no Chome's Hojoki, which is a really extraordinary text, Japanese text from about 1200, which describes this Japanese guy who, at the age of 50 or 60, basically retreats into a tiny house in the mountains to get away from the disasters and tragedies of life that he's seen, the social chaos, the political polarization, the plague, growing militarization in Japanese society. So there are some strange parallels with our own day, and it is one of the great works of Japanese literature. So, and I did a reading of it on the channel, so do check that out if you haven't already done so. But in relationship to that, Carved Out of Stone writes, you should do, as in me, should do a historical commentary or reaction review on the recent series Shogun with your thoughts. And I will. I checked it out. It's on Disney Plus, I think, in Australia. And I've worked out how I can get access to that. So I will do that in a couple of weeks or so. I've got to give myself a bit of time to actually watch the show. But I won't wait too long because it's running at the moment. So it'd be good to jump on board that. I believe it's quite good. It's based on a novel by James Clavell. But I won't say more about it until I've actually watched it. But historical fiction, whether novel or television drama or movie, can be a great way into feeling yourself into the drama of history. And then finally, Volpine 321, who's made a whole lot of fantastic comments on the channel over time. So thanks so much, Volpine 321, has said, and this will be the last comment, I think. Oh no, I've got two more. I've got two more comments after that. Here we are. So Volpine 321 says, there is two obstacles. Again, this is in relationship to the discussion of the end of empire moment. There is two obstacles the USA faces, which will most likely... I'll just hang on a second. I might just quickly do something else here. So it's a bit easier for me to read. Bear with me 1 second, folks. It won't be very long. If you haven't already, do remember you can support the Burning Archive channel by going to the links in the video description and stuff, including Buy Me a Coffee, the Burning Archive. And you can support me also by supporting, sharing, talking about my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. And there you can take out a paid subscription as well, and you can also click the thanks button here directly on YouTube and express your support for me, and you can also sorry, so many things going on here on managing the streaming service. It can be a bit confusing at times. You can also you can just like, share, and subscribe right here on the YouTube channel as well. And I'm incredibly grateful for your support, even in just watching this show and giving me the sort of confidence to share my thoughts and perspectives on the world with you. So Volpine 321 says there is two obstacles USA faces, which will most likely prevent it from regaining hegemony, despite the efforts of BlackRock, Vanguard, and Carlyle. The USA international conduct for the last few decades has been one of intimidation and political manipulation for USA interests. 80% of conflicts facilitated by USA, over 87% of the world's population is against USA maintaining hegemony, and the two major powers, China and Russia, have been targeted by USA repeatedly. It can be argued that it's not in any country's interest, not even the USA, to have USA maintain hegemonic superiority. The push now is for a multipolar world political structure with no empires or colonialist aspirations. Moving forward, it remains to be seen if this can be achieved. However, the USA hegemony is likely not to recover. The second obstacle is the USD. The international trade of USD has been reducing for the last decade, and it appears to be the intention of several countries to remove the USD as the major international trade currency. USA transfers its debt to the rest of the world through this international trade, simply printing money and spreading the depreciation internationally. With the debt now accumulated by USA and the removal of the major trade of USD internationally, the USA economy will not recover in the near future. Really great points Volpine 321, both worthy of whole shows in themselves, and I may well come to those things as well. I do feel we can live in a world without hegemons. The whole idea of hegemon is I think a bit of a myth, and I think it's a bit of a toxic myth, really. This America's only whatever it is, 4% of the world's population. What really does it get by thinking of itself as a hegemon? Okay, 2 final brief comments. One I quoted before, but I'll just put it in here as well, was by Lady Morwind, Berethel Feeney 4031. Lady Morwind, I fear we are not in 1956, but in early 1914, and I share that fear with you, Lady Morwind. And let us pray to whatever we pray to, that we do not have the same catastrophic consequences of the great world crisis of 1914 to 1942, and because that would be a disaster, absolutely catastrophic disaster. But we are certainly in a major global conflict, and let us hope there's someone who can find their way out of this disaster. And then finally, Mahout 1329, who I've got a sneaking suspicion I know who it is, and thanks so much for your support as well. But Mahout 1329 says, Elliot, again, this is in relationship to Not With a Bang But With a Whimper, in discussing the end of empire. T.S. Eliot's poem, The Hollow Men, this is how the world ends, this is how the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. Eliot's poem is so relevant. Will the US finally collapse from within? And I think that is absolutely a question I will need to do a whole dedicated program on. Perhaps even like a pre-recorded program rather than a live stream, so I could really get my thoughts together on it. And it's interesting actually to compare it to what happened in the Soviet Union in 1991. I've done a video on Vladislav Zubok's book, Collapse, The Rise and Fall of the Soviet Union, which is actually a brilliant account of those events, those major events. Vladimir Putin has said that the problem with empires, from his own experience of what happened in the last years of the Soviet Union, is they keep on marching on, confident that they will go on, and that they just keep making mistakes without fearing the consequences of mistakes. So whether that will lead to collapse, as happened to the Soviet Union and Russia as the largest state within the Soviet Union. It also happened to Ukraine, and in a way Ukraine is still not really properly actually ever recovered from the collapse of the Soviet Union. But whether it will happen in the same way for the United States, I doubt. It may well be we see a really long, slow crumbling, but I think let's address that in a dedicated show another time. So everyone, thank you so much for joining me today on the live stream. It's been a real pleasure. Oh, my goodness me, I've been going for nearly 2 hours now. I hope it's been interesting to you. We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about Victory Day in Russia, Sedinem Velike Pabiedi, everyone, and we've talked about the situation in the conflict, big geopolitical conflict between Russia and NATO and Ukraine, and we've talked about the cultural resurgence in Russia, but also across the multipolar world, the way in which globalization is no longer westernization. The currents of change are flowing into the West from other parts of the world. And we in the West need to learn how to adapt to that. And then finally, we've talked about the remarkable poet Marina Tsvetaeva, poet-writer, and how her personal story of tragedy is also a story of how ultimately culture outlasts politics. And perhaps that is a message of hope on this day of victory and grief and tragedy to finish this show with, because the extraordinary stories, the extraordinary language, the extraordinary poetry and essays of Marina Tsvetaeva has survived her personal tragedies. And I hope that gives us all a little bit of confidence to keep on going in these difficult times. Okay, everyone, I think I will end the stream there. Oh, hang on. I have... I've got a question from Sun Love Official. Sir, what your opinion of next 6 years of President Putin together with AI technology? Sun Love Official, and I think it looks like his sort of Hindi script to me. I might address that question in another show. It's a really great question, which I will want to get to, but I'm just getting a little bit tired now. I've been on air for nearly 2 hours, and it's an interesting question. President Putin is getting on now. I think this will definitely be his last term. I think Russia is winning the war, and there was that memorable moment when Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin met in Moscow a year or so ago, where they said, the world is going through changes which have not been seen for 100 years. And we are leading them. And I think in a way that's kind of what I'm saying. It's sort of like it's a new phase of globalization, a phase of globalization which isn't all coming from Washington and London. That is coming from New Delhi and Beijing and Moscow and Durban and from place in Mexico City and all around the world. And there's going to be a lot of challenges around that. AI is going to be one of those challenges. But I also kind of think some of the air is coming out of AI as we're speaking. Sun Love Official, I hope that's a good, quick response to your question, and thanks for asking it. And I'll probably release all the comments on this little section of the responses to your comments in a separate video. And Sun Love Official, I might pick up that the question of both AI and the next 6-year term of President Putin in another show. But if it's okay with everyone now, I think I will sign out and wish you all well for the rest of your day. And I hope you all have a good Victory Day, and just think a little bit about the tragedy, the grief, loss, but also the seriousness of purpose that there is there in Russia in relationship to the great patriotic war of 1941 to 1945.